You ever have one of those moments where you realize your entire sense of normal is about to get rearranged? Yeah, that was the morning I watched my HOA neighbor drop a police chief's badge right on my doorstep. It was just past 9, the air still cool enough that you could smell dew on the grass. I was in my kitchen, sipping burnt coffee and pretending to enjoy early retirement when I heard the sound of metal scraping against my front lock. At first, I thought it was the mail carrier fumbling with a package, until the sound went on and on. So I walked over, peeked through the front window, and there she was. Patricia Williams, the HOA president. Now I'd seen Patricia around the neighborhood before, always marching somewhere with that clipboard like she was inspecting troops. But this morning, she looked like she was trying to break into Fort Knox. The woman had her brow furrowed, her heels perfectly balanced on the porch tiles, and a shiny gold key shaking in the lock that clearly wasn't working. The sound of her bracelet clinking against the door handle echoed through the quiet street. Then she muttered under her breath, "These locks must have been changed without authorization." I almost laughed. Who talks like that outside of a courtroom drama? But as I stood there, something about the scene just felt off. There was no reason for her to be trying to open my front door. No emergency, no phone call, nothing. Just her, sweating under that perfect bob haircut, twisting a key that didn't belong to this house. She caught me watching through the glass and froze. Her face did that half-smile thing people do when they've been caught doing something stupid, but try to pretend it's completely normal. "Oh," she called out, waving the clipboard. "Routine inspection, mandatory for new residents, nothing to worry about." Sure, because breaking into my house before breakfast is the most normal HOA thing ever. I didn't even have time to respond before she started rummaging through that oversized leather purse of hers, muttering something about proper keys and compliance codes. And then it happened. Something silver flew out of her purse and landed right by my boots. I looked down and my brain stalled for a second. It wasn't a coin. It wasn't a keychain. It was a badge. Heavy, real, cold. The kind of metal that makes your stomach drop when you read what's engraved on it. Police Chief S. Harris. I blinked once, twice, thinking maybe it was some cheap souvenir or prop, but no. That engraving, the official seal, the way the light caught its edges, this thing was legit. Patricia went pale. Her perfectly tanned face drained of color like someone had just pulled her plug. "You can't tell anyone about that?" she snapped, lunging forward like I was holding the last lifeboat on the Titanic. She snatched it from my hand with shaking fingers and stuffed it back into her purse. "It's evidence," she said, voice trembling. "I'm helping the police with a neighborhood investigation." Evidence. That was the moment my instincts kicked in. See, I used to work as a forensic accountant. Spent years catching people who thought they were smarter than the system. So when someone starts using words like evidence while stealing your front doorknob, yeah, alarms go off. "Evidence for what?" I asked. Patricia straightened her shoulders, suddenly regaining that "I'm in charge" tone she probably practiced in the mirror. "You wouldn't understand," she said. "Some people in this community are abusing power. My job is to maintain order." And just like that, she turned on her heel and strutted down the walkway, her heels hitting the concrete like gunshots. I stood there, door still locked, wondering what kind of order involved stolen police property. The neighborhood looked normal. Lawns trimmed, sprinklers hissing, someone's dog barking in the distance. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something ugly was brewing beneath all that perfection. Patricia's words echoed in my head. "You'll learn what real authority looks like." Real authority with a stolen badge. That night I replayed everything in my head over and over. The key that didn't fit, the trembling hands, the way she'd said evidence like it was supposed to mean something to me. I wanted to write it off as just another overzealous HOA moment, but that badge, it kept flashing in my mind like a warning light. Who carries a police chief's badge unless they are one, or stole it? The house was quiet, Jane asleep in the next room, the kind of soft breathing that comes after a long day at her boring government job. Except, for the first time, I started wondering what boring really meant. When I closed my eyes, I could still see Patricia's white knuckles clutching that badge. And for some reason, I had the strangest feeling this wasn't the last time I'd see it. The next morning started like any other Saturday, at least it tried to. Birds chirping, sprinklers hissing across the cul-de-sac, and that faint smell of fresh mulch from the landscaping crew. But something in the air felt wrong. You ever wake up with that quiet itch in your gut that says the peace around you is just pretending? That was me. By 8, Patricia's blinds were already open across the street. I could see her silhouette moving back and forth like a restless ghost behind those lace curtains, the same clipboard in her hand, that same mechanical precision in her steps. She wasn't watching her garden. She was watching us. Jane was getting ready for work, her usual calm self. Hair pulled back, light makeup, travel mug in hand. She caught me staring out the window and smiled. "You're doing that thing again," she said, fastening her watch. "What thing?" "The overthinking thing," she teased. "It's probably nothing. HOA people love their little rules." I wanted to believe her. God, I did. But as she walked out the door, the sound of the gate creaking open, then clicking shut behind her, felt heavier than usual, like the sound of something closing, not just the gate. When she drove off, I stayed by that window longer than I care to admit. Patricia was out there now, camera in hand, pretending to take pictures of the community flower beds. Her lens, however, never once pointed at the flowers. Instead, it tracked my driveway, my porch, my windows. That's when it hit me this wasn't just paranoia. This was surveillance. Over the next few days, it became routine. Every morning around the same time, she'd emerge, clipboard and phone ready, talking to neighbors, whispering, pointing subtly toward my house like she was narrating an exposé. By day 3, people were avoiding eye contact when I went for the mail. One neighbor, Todd from 2 houses down, actually crossed the street mid-conversation. Patricia was building something, a story, a narrative she could sell. And from the way people started acting around me, I realized she was already halfway done. That's when I caught her. Late one afternoon, around 6 p.m., I stepped outside to water the front shrubs. The air had that golden glow right before sunset, quiet except for the hum of cicadas. That's when I noticed movement near the fence. Patricia crouched low, pretending to fix her shoe. Except she wasn't fixing anything. She was holding a small Ziploc bag. Inside it, what looked like folded papers. She slipped it behind my trash bin, glanced around, and walked off like she hadn't just staged something. I waited until she was gone, heart thumping, and walked over. The bag was cold to the touch, like it had been kept in a car cooler. Inside were printed emails, my name, fake signatures, and what looked like payment records. Fabricated bribes. I laughed, but it wasn't the kind of laugh you feel in your chest. It was dry, empty, the kind that comes when you realize the storm's already started and you're standing without shelter. Patricia wasn't just meddling, she was staging evidence. The next day, I went full forensic mode. Installed discreet cameras under the porch light, inside the birdhouse, even one hidden in the old oak tree. Every motion, every visit, every whisper near my property, recorded. I started documenting her timeline the same way I used to document fraud. Dates, times, behavior patterns. Patricia's days were mapped like clockwork, morning inspections, mid-afternoon gossip rounds, and late-night computer marathons visible through her window. But what chilled me most wasn't her precision, it was her purpose. The more I observed, the more obvious it became that Patricia believed her own lies. She wasn't just acting. She was convincing herself that she was exposing corruption. That I, some mid-career accountant with coffee stains on my shirt, was the criminal mastermind of Maplewood Heights. One evening I overheard her talking to a neighbor, her voice low but sharp. "He's clever," she whispered. "Hides things through his wife's job. Government people are all the same. Just wait, I have proof." Proof, that word again. It hung in the air like poison. That night I couldn't sleep. Every creak of the house sounded like a footstep. Every flicker of light outside made my pulse jump. Jane noticed, of course, but I couldn't tell her yet, not until I understood how deep this went. But deep down, I knew something Patricia didn't. You don't frame a forensic accountant, and get away with it. By the end of that week, I'd seen enough through those security cameras to know I wasn't dealing with some eccentric HOA busybody. Patricia Williams was something else entirely, the kind of person who weaponized politeness and paper trails. Every night around 9, her house glowed blue from the reflection of her laptop screen. I could see her through the narrow gap in her curtains, sitting at her dining table surrounded by stacks of binders, tabs, and folders. It looked less like a home office and more like a miniature police precinct. The soft hum of her printer filled the night air, steady and mechanical, like she was manufacturing evidence by the pound. I started noticing patterns. Each binder had a color code: red for incidents, blue for suspected corruption, and yellow for financial irregularities. And almost every file had my name on it somewhere. But she wasn't just targeting me. Her obsession extended to anyone who ever disagreed with her. I found out from one of the older neighbors, Mrs. Hanley, that Patricia had once gotten the Johnson family evicted 2 years back, claimed they were running illegal business operations from their garage. Turns out, they just refinished furniture as a side hustle. Then there was the Clark family, moved out last year. According to Patricia, they had unlicensed daycare violations. But the truth, they just watched their niece after school. Both families gone, both under clouds of rumor Patricia created herself. You start to see a pattern, and it chills you, not because it's clever, but because it's deliberate. I dug deeper, spent nights combing through public records, old HOA minutes, even archived court filings, and what I found made my blood run cold. Patricia had filed over 30 official complaints in the past 5 years, all similar, all leading to fines, citations, or people moving out. She didn't just thrive on control, she needed it. And yet her methods were disturbingly organized. She'd start with a rumor, small, plausible, a noise complaint, an unapproved shed, a vehicle parked too close to the curb. Then she'd escalate: forged letters, altered photos, fake signatures. By the time anyone realized, the paper trail made them look guilty. It was psychological warfare, wrapped in bureaucracy. The more I read, the more I understood how she'd survived this long. Her weapon wasn't violence, it was credibility. She acted official, confident, wrote emails with perfect formatting and legal citations that made her sound like she'd passed the bar. Most people never questioned her authority until it was too late. But this time she'd overplayed her hand. That badge changed everything. One evening, as I sat reviewing my footage, I caught something that made me pause the screen mid-frame. Patricia was standing at her kitchen counter, the badge in her hand again. The lamplight glinted off its surface. Her expression wasn't pride this time, it was fear. She was talking to someone on speakerphone. I couldn't hear much through the camera mic, but a few words cut through the static. No, he saw it. Yes, I told him it's evidence. No, he doesn't suspect. No, he doesn't suspect. I rewound that clip at least 5 times. My pulse thudded in my ears. Who was she talking to? What kind of evidence needed coordination? That night I couldn't stay still. My mind raced through everything I knew: the stolen badge, the fake case, the fabricated paperwork. None of it made sense unless Patricia had something or someone backing her. But the next morning brought something worse. A letter slipped under my door in a plain white envelope, no stamp, no name. Inside, printed pages, screenshots of fake emails between me and local contractors. Payments, bribes, kickbacks, all fabricated but frighteningly convincing. And stapled to the back was a single line in neat handwriting. Some people in this community think they're untouchable. Let's see how the police feel about that. That handwriting was Patricia's. I sat at my dining table for a long while, staring at that note, the morning light creeping across the floor. My hands shook not from fear but anger, cold, calculating anger. Patricia thought she was playing a game of neighborhood politics, but she'd crossed into criminal territory now. False evidence, defamation, stalking. It wasn't just harassment anymore. So I made a decision. If Patricia wanted a case, she was about to get one. A real one. I spent the next 2 days gathering my own evidence. Every camera angle, every timestamp, every suspicious visit logged with forensic detail. I cataloged everything the way I used to build corporate fraud cases, layered, precise, airtight. By Sunday night, I had a digital folder labeled simply, Exhibit A, Patricia Williams. And something told me I'd need it sooner than I thought. By the following week, the neighborhood didn't feel like home anymore. It felt like a stage, and Patricia was the director. Every gesture, every look from a neighbor carried a faint question mark now. I'd step outside to grab the mail and feel curtains twitch. Conversations died the second I walked past. Even the air felt heavier, like everyone was waiting for something to happen. I kept my distance, kept quiet. The best way to watch someone like Patricia is to let them think they've won. Through the tiny lens in my porch light, I watched her every day. Mornings, she made calls, long ones, packing her living room. Afternoons, she typed like a stenographer on caffeine. Evenings, she printed. And sometimes, when she thought no one could see, she'd sit there staring at that badge, just staring. It wasn't curiosity in her eyes anymore. It was possession, the kind of look a thief gives stolen gold. One evening, I decided to check something, an old public records database from my accountant days. It wasn't exactly legal for me to use it now, but habit dies hard. I searched Patricia Williams Maplewood Heights and cross-referenced with civil filings. My screen lit up like a Christmas tree. 5 prior addresses, 3 restraining orders filed against her then dismissed, 2 civil suits she'd filed herself, defamation of character, harassment by neighbors, both quietly dropped before trial. And then I found a name I recognized, Johnson v. Williams, the family Mrs. Hanley mentioned. Patricia had accused them of falsifying permits, submitting corrupt payments to local inspectors. Same pattern, same accusations. But what really made my blood run cold was the timeline. Each case ended the same month a new family moved into her neighborhood. It was a cycle. She'd destroy one, move on to the next. And now it was our turn. That night I left my office light on and waited. At exactly 9:42 p.m., Patricia's silhouette appeared across the street, camera in hand. I watched her raise it toward my window, flash flickering. I gave her something to photograph, a blank table, a stack of receipts, and a single empty coffee mug. She snapped a few shots, lowered the camera, and smiled to herself, like she'd just collected another piece of proof. That smile hit me harder than any confrontation could have, because it wasn't joy, it was certainty. She believed she was right. By the next morning, it got worse. A city vehicle showed up, code enforcement. They claimed they'd received an anonymous report about unauthorized construction. The officer was polite but uncomfortable, reading off his clipboard like he already knew it was nonsense. When he left, I saw Patricia watching from her porch, coffee in hand, pretending to admire her roses. That's when I realized she'd found a new gear. She wasn't satisfied with rumors anymore. She was moving to official channels. She was building a legal paper trail, one complaint at a time. So I built mine. Every video clip, every timestamp, every piece of mail. I even started recording audio from the living room vent that faced her property. I wasn't just documenting harassment anymore. I was building a forensic case file that could survive in court. Still, a question kept gnawing at me. Why that badge? Why hold on to something so risky, so traceable? I kept circling back to it, Chief S. Harris. The engraving, the weight. Police chiefs don't just lose their badges. If Patricia had one, there had to be a story behind it. Jane noticed the tension that night. She sat beside me on the couch, her hand resting lightly on my knee. "You've been on edge for days," she said softly. I forced a smile, "Just work stuff." She looked at me for a long second, the kind of look that cuts through polite lies. "You know," she said quietly, "sometimes pretending everything's fine just makes it worse." Her words stayed with me long after she went to bed. The truth was, I wasn't sure how fine we were anymore. The woman across the street was constructing a fantasy where I was the villain. And the woman sleeping down the hall, I was starting to wonder what secrets she kept, too. Because that badge wasn't random. And if Patricia was arrogant enough to steal it, she had to know who it belonged to. The next day, curiosity overpowered caution. While Jane was at work, I opened our shared closet to grab a jacket and froze. Behind a row of coats, half hidden beneath a garment bag, something dark blue caught the light. It looked like a uniform. I reached in and pulled it out. Heavy fabric, crisp creases, embroidered patches that gleamed under the ceiling lamp. My breath hitched as I read the nameplate. Chief S. Harris. For a few seconds, everything went quiet. The clock, the hum of the fridge, even the faint buzz of cicadas outside. All I could hear was my own heartbeat, loud and uneven. The badge Patricia dropped, the stolen credentials, the secrecy, it all snapped into focus. Jane wasn't a clerk. She wasn't some middle-tier administrator in a dusty county office. My wife was the police chief of Riverside County. And somehow, our HOA president had her badge. I stood there staring at the uniform, realization spreading like fire through dry grass. The person Patricia thought she was framing for corruption, the faceless official behind her imaginary conspiracy, was standing in my kitchen every morning making coffee. And if Patricia ever found that out, she wasn't just playing with gossip anymore. She was walking straight into her own destruction. I must have stood there in that closet for 10 whole minutes, holding the uniform like it was a live wire. The patches shimmered under the light gold thread on dark navy fabric, the kind of official shine you only ever see up close if you're wearing it, or handcuffed by it. Chief S. Harris. That was Jane, my Jane. The same woman who still made pancakes on Sunday mornings and left post-it notes in my lunch bag with dumb jokes. The same woman who told me she handled boring government paperwork. And now, somehow, her badge, her actual badge, had ended up in the hands of the most dangerous HOA president in suburbia. When Jane came home that evening, I was waiting for her. Not angry, not yet, just numb. The uniform lay on the coffee table, the lamplight glinting off the badge insignia stitched into the sleeve. She stopped in the doorway the second she saw it. The color drained from her face. "Where did you find that?" she asked quietly. "In our closet," I said. "Next to the winter coats. You want to tell me why my wife's name is embroidered above the word chief?" For a long moment, she didn't answer. She just stood there, her hands trembling ever so slightly. Then finally, she exhaled, that long, defeated kind of sigh people make when they realize the truth can't stay buried anymore. "I'm the police chief for Riverside County," she said. No preamble, no excuses, just quiet honesty. "I took the position 6 months ago. I didn't tell anyone because I wanted to start over without people treating me differently. Not neighbors, not friends, not even you, at least not at first." I just stared. "So all this time, Patricia..." She nodded. "Has been using my stolen badge to build her case against you." The words hung between us like smoke. Jane sat down beside me, her fingers fidgeting with her wedding ring. "It went missing from my vehicle a few weeks ago. I filed an internal theft report, but I never imagined it ended up here, with her." Her voice cracked a little on that last word. I could see how much it cost her, the guilt, the fear that her secret had put us in the crosshairs. "So what do we do?" I asked. She hesitated. "Normally, I'd say report it. But Patricia's already crossed into criminal territory, theft of police property, falsifying evidence, filing false reports. The second she walks that badge into a precinct, she's finished." Her eyes lifted to mine, and maybe that's justice enough. That thought hit me harder than I expected, because part of me wanted revenge, wanted to see Patricia humiliated the way she'd humiliated everyone else. But another part wanted to see her realize what she'd done, to feel the weight of her own arrogance collapse on her. Jane's hand brushed mine, steady but firm. "We do nothing," she said quietly. "We let her own actions undo her. That's the only punishment that really sticks." Outside, the sound of crickets filled the silence between us. Somewhere down the street, a sprinkler clicked on. The whole world felt deceptively peaceful, like the eye of a storm right before the sky tears open. I leaned back on the couch, exhaling slowly. "You realize she thinks you're just a clerk, right?" Jane actually smiled at that, a sad little curve of her lips. That's what makes it perfect. We sat there in silence for a while, both knowing what was coming but saying nothing more. By the next morning, Patricia was at it again, packing her driveway, phone pressed to her ear, voice sharp and theatrical. Through the camera mic, I could hear fragments of her conversation. Words like corruption, evidence, chief's badge. My stomach knotted. She was going to the police. I told Jane that evening, and she didn't even flinch. "Let her," she said, calmly sipping her coffee. "She wants a hand over stolen police credentials? Good. It'll save internal affairs the trouble of finding her." It was strange watching her switch from wife to officer in the span of seconds. Her tone changed, crisp, commanding, but still measured. The calm of someone who's been through far worse. That night I couldn't sleep again. The ceiling fan hummed softly above me, casting slow-moving shadows on the wall. I thought about Patricia, about all the families she'd crushed under the weight of her fake authority. I thought about the Johnsons, the Clarks, and now us. And for the first time I realized something. Patricia didn't fear power. She coveted it. She'd spent her life chasing the illusion of authority, HOA titles, clipboards, fake evidence, because deep down she couldn't stand being ordinary. But the thing about pretending to have power is that eventually you run into someone who actually does. By sunrise, I made peace with it. I'd document everything quietly, thoroughly, and then step back. Let her walk straight into her own downfall. I just didn't know it would happen so soon. The next morning, I watched from my car as Patricia marched up the steps of the Maplewood Police Department, heels clicking like war drums. In her hand, that badge. Jane's badge. And for the first time in weeks, I didn't feel angry. I felt calm. Because I knew what she didn't. Every step she took toward that door was a step closer to the end of her own story. From where I sat, parked across the street from the Maplewood Police Department, it looked almost peaceful. Mid-morning sunlight spilled across the front steps. A flag flapped lazily in the breeze. If you didn't know better, you'd think it was any normal day. But Patricia Williams wasn't a normal person. She marched up those steps with a kind of self-importance that could be heard in the rhythm of her heels, sharp, deliberate, echoing off concrete. In her hand, she clutched Jane's badge like it was Excalibur. You could see it gleam every time the sunlight hit. I watched through the windshield, my pulse slow but steady. It's a strange feeling watching justice begin, not in a courtroom, not in some grand showdown, but in the quiet confidence of a woman walking toward her own ruin. Inside, she met with Detective Johnson, a man I'd seen around a few times at community events. The kind who always looked slightly bored, like real crime rarely reached our zip code. If anyone could be fooled by Patricia's theater, it was him. For the next hour, I sat in that car, pretending to read the paper, while through the station windows I could see her gesturing dramatically. Her hands moved like she was delivering a closing argument to a jury. At one point, she actually dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. The woman was performing. I couldn't hear her words, but I knew her script. She'd been rehearsing it for weeks. The lies, the fake documents, the heroic tone of a concerned citizen exposing corruption. When she finally emerged, the expression on her face said it all. Smug satisfaction, victory. She sold the story. I let her walk right past my car, her perfume lingering like cheap victory. She didn't even glance in my direction. Why would she? In her mind, I was already finished, one more corrupt neighbor she'd outsmarted. What she didn't realize was that the minute she handed over that badge, the story stopped belonging to her. By evening, Jane got the call she'd been expecting. "Maplewood PD just submitted a corruption report to our office," she said, her tone even. "They think they're investigating some kind of bribery scheme involving a Chief Harris." Apparently, their star witness provided physical evidence. Her eyebrows lifted just slightly. My badge. I sat across from her, heart pounding but steady. So, now what? She looked down at her coffee, swirling it slowly. Now we wait. I didn't understand it at first, this calm, patient strategy of hers. My instinct was to charge in, expose Patricia, shove the truth in everyone's face. But Jane had spent her career dealing with people who thought they were smarter than the system. She knew something I didn't. Sometimes the cleanest justice is the one that catches itself. Sure enough, the next morning it started. Marked cars rolled down our street. Not one, not two. A whole convoy, local patrols, unmarked sedans, even a county vehicle with tinted windows. Flashing lights reflected off mailboxes and manicured lawns. Neighbors peeked through blinds like it was the neighborhood Super Bowl. Patricia stood across the street, arms folded, lips pressed together in a thin smile. She looked triumphant. The queen of suburbia, finally watching her peasants get what they deserved. And then Detective Johnson stepped onto our porch, clipboard in hand. "Mr. Harris," he said, "we have a search warrant." I glanced past him at the paperwork, the official stamps, the signatures, all built from Patricia's lies. "You're investigating me for bribing the Riverside County Police Chief?" I asked, forcing myself not to smile. He nodded gravely. "Yes, sir. We've received compelling evidence suggesting misconduct involving your wife's department." The irony was so thick I could practically taste it. I signed the acknowledgement form with a steady hand and stepped aside. They entered, careful, methodical, cameras flashing, gloves on. Patricia crossed the street, pretending to assist, carrying her clipboard like an award trophy. She held Jane's badge up for everyone to see as if it were the smoking gun. I could see Jane's county-issued SUV turning the corner, right on cue. Patricia didn't notice, not yet. Her voice carried across the lawn. "Detective, this is the badge the suspect used when he tried to bribe me, proof of his connections." She was glowing, lost in her own performance. She didn't realize that the crowd was shifting, that heads were turning toward the new car pulling into our driveway, the car with the Riverside County Police insignia on the door. Jane stepped out, calm as ever, her uniform immaculate, her badge number gleaming in the sun. The same badge number Patricia was holding in her hand. And for a second, everything went still. The officers froze. Patricia blinked, confused. Detective Johnson squinted. Ma'am, can I ask who you are?" Jane's voice was steady, cool. "Chief Harris, Riverside County, this is my residence." And just like that, silence. A silence so thick you could feel it vibrate in your chest. Patricia's mouth fell open, the confidence draining out of her in slow motion. Her arm trembled as she looked down at the badge in her hand, the stolen badge. And in that instant, I realized she wasn't just caught. She was about to witness her entire illusion collapse in front of everyone. For a second, it felt like the world had stopped breathing. The cicadas, the wind, even the hum of car engines, everything went quiet. Every pair of eyes on that street fixed on one image. Jane standing in her uniform, sunlight cutting across the badge on her chest, while Patricia stood there holding the exact same one. The silence broke with Detective Johnson's confused voice. "Wait, you're Chief Harris?" Jane nodded once. "That's correct." He blinked, once, twice. His gaze drifted to Patricia, who was frozen mid-smile, her clipboard halfway between her chest and the ground. "Then whose badge is that?" Patricia stammered, her voice catching. It was evidence. I was helping you people investigate." Jane's tone stayed calm, professional, but there was steel under every word. "You've been in possession of stolen police property. You've impersonated an officer, falsified statements, and interfered with an active investigation." The detective's expression shifted in real time, from confusion to shock to something close to disgust. "Ma'am," he said, turning toward Patricia, "I'm going to have to ask you to step aside." Patricia's face went pale. No, this is a mistake. She's lying, they're both lying." Her voice cracked, echoing off the houses. "She's not the real chief, she's pretending this is all a setup." It was surreal watching her crumble like that. All those months of composure, the tailored blazers, the confident speeches at HOA meetings, it all vanished in seconds. What stood there now wasn't a woman of authority. It was someone terrified of losing the illusion of it. Jane didn't flinch. "Detective, please run my credentials through your system." He did, quietly, efficiently. The air grew heavier with every second that passed. You could almost feel Patricia's panic building as the officer's radio crackled back with confirmation. Confirmed, Chief Sarah Harris, Riverside County PD. And that was it. The truth, spoken out loud like the final nail in Patricia's carefully constructed fantasy. Her knees gave a little, her voice dropping to a pleading whisper. I was just trying to protect the neighborhood, I thought. Jane stepped closer, her voice low but firm. You thought you could play law enforcement, that you could ruin lives and call it leadership, but you crossed a line you can't uncross. I'll never forget the look on Patricia's face right then. It wasn't anger, it was realization. The kind of dawning horror that comes when someone finally sees the full scope of their own lies reflected back at them. The clipboard slipped from her hand, hitting the pavement with a hollow clap. Neighbors began to emerge from their houses, one by one. Some were whispering, others filming on their phones. Todd from 2 doors down, who'd avoided me for weeks, just stood there with his mouth open. Mrs. Hanley crossed herself quietly. Patricia turned toward them all, trembling. You don't understand, she's dangerous. They're all working together. But the words came out thin, desperate, unraveling faster than her voice could keep up. Detective Johnson sighed, rubbing his temple. Ma'am, you need to stop talking. When the handcuffs clicked around her wrists, the sound was strangely soft, but it carried through the air like thunder. As they guided her toward the car, Patricia's eyes darted everywhere, searching for one friendly face, one person who might still believe her. There were none. She passed my driveway, and for the briefest second our eyes met. No anger left, no defiance. Just confusion, like she still couldn't understand how the story she'd written had turned against her. The police cruiser door shut with a metallic thud, muffling her final words. I was only trying to help. Then she was gone. The crowd lingered. People whispered, exchanged awkward glances, and slowly drifted back inside, leaving the street empty again. The sun was dipping lower now, stretching shadows across the lawns. I stood beside Jane, watching the last car pull away. She didn't say anything for a long time, just watched the flashing lights disappear down the road. Finally, she sighed. You know, the hardest thing about being in charge of the law isn't enforcing it. I looked at her. What is it then? Watching people destroy themselves with it. We walked back inside together. The house was quiet again, except for the faint ticking of the hallway clock. But it didn't feel like the same house anymore. It felt lighter somehow, like the weight of weeks of lies had finally lifted. I poured us both a cup of coffee. Neither of us said a word for a while. We didn't need to. Outside, the neighborhood looked peaceful again. Lawn sprinklers misted the air, a kid rode his bike past, and for once, no one was watching us from behind a curtain. Sometimes karma doesn't need anyone's help. Sometimes it just waits, quietly, patiently, until the moment someone writes their own ending. You'd think after something like that, flashing lights, handcuffs, an entire street watching the self-appointed queen of the HOA dragged away, life would go back to normal overnight. It didn't. For days, Maplewood Heights felt like a ghost town. People kept their heads down, no one talked much, and every conversation ended in awkward pauses. It was like we'd all been living in a play Patricia had written, and now that she was gone, no one knew what their lines were anymore. The HOA board dissolved quietly. Emails stopped. The weekly compliance notices that used to clutter our mailboxes disappeared like they'd never existed. The neighborhood Facebook page even went dark for a while, no more posts about lawn violations or mailbox paint shades. It was eerie but peaceful, like the neighborhood was finally exhaling. Jane and I spent those first few evenings sitting on the porch again, something we hadn't done in weeks. We'd sip coffee, watch the sunset bleed over the rooftops, and listen to the soft creak of the porch swing, the kind of silence that finally meant safety instead of fear. She never gloated, never once said, "I told you so." That wasn't her style. She just looked tired, relieved maybe, like someone who'd finally set down a burden too heavy to carry quietly any longer. A few days later, Detective Johnson stopped by. No badge this time, no clipboard, just 2 cups of coffee from the corner cafe. He stood on our front steps, hands in his pockets. "Thought you should know," he said. "Your neighbor's being charged with impersonation of a law enforcement officer, filing false reports and obstruction. It's quite a list." I nodded slowly. Guess she won't be running the HOA from county jail. He cracked a faint smile. "You'd be surprised. Some people don't stop trying to control everything, even behind bars." He looked off toward Patricia's empty house, its blinds drawn, yard already going wild. "You know, she wasn't the first I've seen like that. Folks who can't stand not being in charge of others. They start small neighborhood watch, HOA, local committees, and before long, they're drunk on it." He took a sip of his coffee, then added quietly, "Power doesn't change people. It just shows who they were all along." That line stuck with me. Even after he left, I couldn't shake it. Because he was right. Patricia didn't become that way because of authority. She was drawn to it because it gave her something she couldn't find anywhere else: control. And when she lost that illusion, she unraveled. A week passed before the neighborhood started coming alive again. People began waving at each other. Kids played outside without being told to keep their bikes in approved zones. Someone even started repainting the HOA sign near the entrance. The one Patricia insisted had to be regulation beige. Now it was bright blue. Mrs. Hanley came over with cookies one afternoon. She hugged Jane a little too tightly and whispered, "We didn't know. We're sorry." Jane just smiled. "It's okay," she said softly. "You all know now." We sat around the table that evening, talking with neighbors who hadn't spoken to us in months. It wasn't an apology tour. It was healing, slow and quiet. People realizing that fear had turned them into bystanders. That letting one person's obsession dictate the peace of many is the same as giving them permission to rule. Later that night, after everyone had gone home, I stood in the yard, the moonlight spilling across the grass. The street looked peaceful again. No patrols, no shouting, no shadows lurking behind blinds. Just home the way it was supposed to be. Jane joined me, barefoot, her hair still damp from the shower. She looked at the stars and said, almost to herself, "You know what the real difference is between authority and control." I turned toward her. "What?" "Authority serves people," she said quietly. "Control uses them." She was right, of course. Patricia had never understood that difference. I looked across the street at her empty house. The porch light still burned out, mailbox overflowing, a small patch of weeds creeping across the driveway. Funny how fast perfection falls apart when no one's left to enforce it. Eventually, someone new would move in. Maybe a family, maybe an older couple. They'd never know the full story, just bits and pieces, neighborhood whispers about the lady who went too far. And maybe that was enough. Because some lessons don't need to be retold in detail. Sometimes, it's enough to let the silence carry what words can't. Before heading inside, I took one last look around. The porch swing creaked softly, a warm breeze stirred the trees, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I felt peace. Real peace. There's a funny thing about karma. It doesn't rush, it doesn't shout, it just waits. And when it finally shows up, it doesn't need anyone's permission to balance the scales. We didn't ruin Patricia, she did that herself. All we did was stop standing in her way. Sometimes the people who crave the most power are the ones least capable of handling it. And sometimes, the strongest thing you can do isn't fight back, it's let the truth do what truth does best. Expose everything. You've heard this confession, now wait until you hear the next one. The truth that shatters everything you thought you knew.